gosh, what are your earliest memories of your dad and everything kind of growing up in that era? I mean, that must have been kind of surreal with Roger and your dad. I mean, this is, for us, this is what we've all kind of looked up to. And the people, these are the people that made America's team. It's kind of wild.
It is wild. And what it became after my dad in the 60s is that part is more known. And it's the part I remember, actually. You were asking how much I remember. I was 100 days old when the Ice Bowl was played, 3 or 4 when my dad retired and started doing Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
So that's really what I remember, is growing up in the booth and on the road and Howard Cosell and Gifford and all that, which is pretty exciting thing to grow. As a childhood, it was pretty interesting. But I didn't know so much what he did as a player, and when he was a cowboy, before an announcer. So this project has really educated me and taken me on a journey, and I've met a lot of the players that I guess I met when I was 2 or 3, but I don't really remember. And they've been really cool and embraced me and told me stories, and I'm starting to realize how much happened in the 60s and how important it was for Roger and America's team that came in the 70s and then beyond,
Is it weird to think, I mean, so much happened here in Dallas. I mean, politically, obviously, with JFK, but with America's team, with Coach Landry and everything that he was able to build, how were you aware of it going into the film, that you would unearth so much connections between the country and the city? It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, no idea. I knew maybe 25% of the story. My dad actually didn't talk a lot about his playing years, mainly because Monday Night Football was just such a big deal, and that's sort of what dominated the conversation in my childhood. So I knew a good amount of the story, and I knew some of the inside story, but a fraction of what I've learned now. And Dallas is another example, like another character in the movie, basically, because so much was overshadowed by JFK. And there's amazing innovations, progress. It was a boom town. It was much more sophisticated than people think, and all that is playing into kind of larger narrative that is seen through the eyes of the team and my dad. And they were involved somehow in everything. Like the 6 degrees of separation was not, less than 1. So it's a cool way to tell that story.
I've got to know, when you were traveling with your dad for Monday Night Football, was there any cities that you remember that stood out, or just times that just, wow, I love being here at this moment?
Yeah. It gets a little blurry where exactly I was at what time, but I remember certain cities. I'll just try to think of one thing. The Vikings, when you went to Minnesota at the airport, they had these things called purple people eaters, and they would come up on scissors and they would go to the plane, and you'd get on these sort of giant purple moving boxes instead of a normal kind of walkway like they have at planes. And they had them with the Viking kind of helmet, and I just remember as a little kid going, this is kind of a fun town. They had the skywalks and all that. Cowboy Stadium, my dad never played in the one in Irving before AT&T, but I remember that was just kind of seems like the first big mega stadium that I remember. And trying to think, there's interesting stories, not so much about the city, but breaking down in a limousine with my dad and O.J. Simpson on the way to the game. That was kind of interesting. I've got vivid memories, but I don't know if they're all tied necessarily to a city. So.
Your dad obviously, him and Frank obviously had the playing days, so they were, I think, connected more in the booth with how the players thought, and they could give their rationale. How much interaction did he have with players of the 70s and 80s, and how were they with your dad? Did you get to see any of that, along with OJ, but just any other players that stood out that obviously connected with working with Frank and your dad?
Yeah, there was a lot of guys, even on the ceremony we did last weekend, where I brought 20 of my dad's teammates together and they were honored, and that was a really, really special thing. a lot of those, or maybe half of those guys, came in the second part of my dad's career. So in the latter half of the 60s, they were rookies, some of them 67, 68. So they continued to play and on the Cowboy team and won the Super Bowl. And so my dad started announcing when some of his teammates were still playing. So there's obviously a connection there. And those guys just knew each other, even the other teams, if it was from college or just friendship, I don't know, partying after the games, whatever it was. He had friends on every team. So a lot of connections in his second kind of career, but still on the field.
So who was more fun, Howard or Frank?
Well, I think my dad was more fun. So I'll stick with that answer.
Was it surreal with your dad there, or did he just kind of, here's Michael, it's okay, we're gonna have fun, or how did he present you to everyone? I mean,
I was kind of just part of the traveling circus. I don't know, and I really loved him for that and for bringing me along. He called it my road scholarship because I was always on the road and I would miss Mondays and sometimes Tuesdays in school. But, and I was too young to really understand the gravity of it or how famous he was or how big a deal Monday Night Football was. I just remember the cities and the people it felt like the Olympics were coming to town. Like Monday Night Football used to be a really big deal, and I would just see people just revere and marvel at my dad and Howard and Frank, and going in and out of the stadiums, just seeing in their eyes almost like a watered down rock star or something. There was a really special thing there. So, but yeah, as far as me, and I would sleep on his feet sometime in the booth or the booth next door, play with my toys in the hallway, or I was just around. But everybody didn't mind.
I've got to ask, when you started doing the research and we're going to tackle this subject matter, who were the first people you went to? Who were the people you talked to? How am I going to tell this story? Who were the first people to kind of get the ball rolling? Yeah.
I started at the top. I began this film after my dad passed away. It was kind of the last real creative conversation I had with him was about doing this film, which started as something and then became something else, and now is First Cowboys. But the original idea was a scripted narrative feature film with actors just on the Ice Bowl. So I was going to try to do it like Saving Private Ryan, that opening sequence where the vets just said that was what it was like. And my dream was to recreate the Ice Bowl and make it the most authentic sports film I could possibly make. And I even wanted that same DP, Janusz Kaminski, and I had all these ideas. So started pitching it around Hollywood and doing that thing, and they said, why don't you do 30 for 30? And that will be kind of like your research period before the film. This was 4 or 5 years ago. So I said, okay, and that didn't happen because of a different, other films came up. It was too far away from the anniversary, whatever. But I just said, I'm gonna film a few of the guys anyway, and I started with Bart Starr. So I called him up and said, Mr. Starr, I'm Michael Meredith, and I want to come. He said, of course, come to my house. Lives in Alabama. I showed up, and I remember vividly he said in a very charming, gracious way, he said, this is almost like General Lee's son doing a documentary on the Civil War. And now that has a little bit more political kind of, connections. But at the time I was like, well, okay, yeah, we lost. We lost the game, but that's an interesting perspective, and he thought so too. So I started with Bart Starr, and then just started getting the Cowboys, Pettis Norman, Rayfield Wright, Walt Garrison, and Roger Staubach, even though he didn't play in the game, just for some perspective, and some great guys, Ralph Neely, and then people in the peripheral, like Willie Nelson lived at our house when I was a kid, off and on, and I got him on his bus, which was interesting. We had an automatic smoke filter on the camera that I could never get rid of. It was just trying to wave that thing out of the way. But some my mom and some of the people that just experienced the game. So I've started there, and now we've been the last 48 hours really jamming. Like Leroy Jordan, Donnie Anderson. We just came from Jerry Kramer.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, Green Bay Packers. Yeah.
Yeah, got a little Packer. Some of the Packers perspectives. Gil Brandt, interviewed him, and Bill Mercer is one of the radio call guys, and just a amazing group of guys, and they're all really supporting and helping out. So.
Yeah, I'm a UNT grad. I'm a former student of Bill's. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we used to. He played it for us. His call.
Oh, all right. He's going strong in his 90s.
Yeah.
Amazing guy.
Still can reflect on so much of what was happening during the game, because I mean, he was stuck up there looking down, and he was like, it was insane.
yeah. Freezing cold press booth, but they did their job. They were all pros, and his broadcast is pretty cool. Him and Blackie Sherrod.
Yeah.
Pretty cool broadcast.
It's in such a history of Dallas. I mean, they just. Blackie's passed on, but like the history of newspapers, of radio, of TV here, that game really impacted so much of the people we know. I mean, Norm Hitchcock on the radios was impacted by that whole experience. Yep. Is it wild to be immersed in something that affects media as a whole in Dallas and affects the city?
Well, the Ice Bowl story for sure. The First Cowboys has now expanded to the birth of the team, the growing pains, JFK, and then kind of helping to change the image of Dallas. So the 60s, a big part of that story, and a group of characters that plays a significant role, they call them the Mad Dogs. So it's Bud Shrake and Gary Cartwright and Blackie and these guys. And they kind of pioneered a gonzo sports journalism and sort of reinvented a little bit of what we were used to from sports writers and journalists. And then they, of course, had an amazing off-field story as well, and they were all friends with my dad and the players, and Bud Shrake dated Jack Ruby's top dancer, and she was always over, and Ruby, it's all incestuous and intertwined, and the sports writers somehow are always in the middle of it. Like, they just showed up. They were everywhere. But my dad, Bud Shrake was one of his really good friends, so I love that part of the story too. You don't have to force the social element into the sport, or vice versa. It's like they were hand in hand, and the press was a big part of that.
You brought up that your dad was aware you were wanting to do this project, or not in this form, but you're wanting to do a project. What were those last conversations like for you? I mean, how cathartic was it to have that moment where you could connect directly to him and his career and everything he's been able to do, and what his legacy?
Well, I remember the last thing he told me about it, because I really just asked for his blessing, or if he would be comfortable with that, because I think I don't think he ever fully realized what he did, what he contributed for the team and the city, because they never won the Super Bowl. He never got that that top prize. So the off-field victory and the rebranding thing that I'm learning more and more about, I don't know if he fully got it. Maybe he was just humble and never talked about it. But I said I want to do this thing on the Ice Bowl, and it's a little weird. You're like, I want to do the most famous game you ever lost. But it was because I thought there was two victories. The Packers, they were the best. They had the three-peat, the legacy. They deserved it. And you don't have to get into the weather and offsides and all that stuff. They won the game. But when he came back, the team came back to Love Field. The fans were celebrating a loss. They were there with signs that said, "We love you. We'll get them next year. We're the best." And I think that was the seed of what was possibly like the beginning of the end of a period of shame and the beginning of a period of pride. So maybe the birth of Cowboy Nation as we know it, or Dallas being home of America's team instead of City of Hate, or the place that killed JFK. So I was trying to kind of explain what I knew then, which is not what I know now, so probably not being very eloquent. I just remember he looked at me and said, "Just tell it like it was." That was his last kind of quote or advice for me to do that. So I've been trying to learn what it was and tell it like he asked me to tell it. So that's this journey I'm on.
You know, one of the other elements about the whole Monday Night Football thing was interesting fashion that was a part of it. I know that's maybe not a big part of the film, but can you just personally talk about, I mean, Frank, your dad, I mean, they led the way you were supposed to look on TV, the way you were supposed to act, the way, obviously Howard gave how you were supposed to sound, but I mean, it's impacted to this very day the way we watch football and all the crazy TV that we handle. I mean, these guys were the first kind of guys to do it around the country, and like you said, it was an experience when Monday Night Football was there for that evening. It was a special thing.
Yeah. Were you referring to the fashion of all of it, or actually the fashion that they're wearing?
Both.
Both. Okay.
Definitely.
Well, it definitely became in fashion to sort of bring more personality into the booth. I think, and my dad definitely brought his personality into the booth, which was not as easy as a quarterback. I think there was like Landry and my dad had their differences, and I think my dad maybe expressed too much individuality or personality sometimes in those meetings or whatever. In the booth, it really worked for him, and that's just who he was too. He wasn't like putting on an act, so it was really good casting. And then as far as the gorgeous, well-designed, beautiful yellow and blue coats with the giant oversized patches, that set a trend, and it was cool. But I just remember thinking they were kind of silly, you know, like I don't know. I remember there was I put some of those coats on. There's some shots, and I even pretended to be my dad. And pre-game, I got some video of that. It's kind of fun, but yeah, I mean, they set a new style, and that was Roone Arledge and Chet Forty and all those guys that really masterminded that, and they just put the right guys in the booth, and then the longest running primetime show in history. So.
Wow. Where in the completion of this are you? When do we get to see this fully come out? You know, give me the timeline of what's coming up.
Okay, so the project split into two. The Ice Bowl is now going to be a 1-hour television show that comes out December 14th on NFL Network. And then First Cowboys is feature film documentary that will come out. There's no specific date, but first half of next year, and we'll finish shooting in November, and then do post-production and music and all that kind of stuff. And but we're hoping to finish the last interviews before Thanksgiving, and then just start cutting through the holidays and have it good to go for maybe a festival, or maybe it'll just air on one of the networks. So.
Do you mind sharing with us what you're about to show us here, and what Dallas Video Fest gets the treat of seeing? Yeah,
so this is the first time ever that anyone has seen footage of the First Cowboys. It's very raw. It's just basically outputted from the camera, time code, and we've ducked down the sound so I can speak and talk about it as it's screening. But I just came from interviewing a bunch of Cowboys, literally right an hour before we got here, and going back to it tomorrow. I'll be in the booth with Troy and Joe, and on the sidelines trying to talk to Aaron and Dak and whoever. So like kind of in between, literally right in the middle of filming it. It's like live BTS, and what we'll see is 1 minute of 15 interviews that I've done already, with just playing in the background. So you'll see Roger Staubach and Mel Renfro and Willie. Willie's in there, and some people you won't know, and I'll explain after. Or I guess I can talk while they're up there, but it's really kind of just like a live feed almost from behind the scenes of this doc that we're making as we speak. There's actually a film crew right now at my childhood home that I don't remember, that they brought me back to, straight from the hospital, and they're filming like the backyard and the room and getting all these shots with the people. Some people who live there now are showing like, this is where Don dreamt up this or did this play, and my mom. So it's kind of it's a world premiere of the behind the scenes, I guess.
It's going to be a fun weekend for you, for sure.
Thank you. I hope so. I'm loving every second of it. So I think you're probably, it's a good prediction.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for the time. Can't wait to see what we're about to see. And thank you for bringing it to Video Fest. I know Bart, this was something he wanted to make happen. And so it's a real pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure. Thank you.